We'll continue with our analysis of the Avodas Yom HaKippurim of the Kohen Gadol with regard to this combination of Dam HaSa'ir and Dam HaPar. And as we mentioned yesterday, the Torah says, V'hiza olav min adam b'etzba'o sheva pamim, v'tiaro v'kidsho. And in addition to the hazos on the chronos of the Mizbeach HaZahav, there's an additional requirement which is called Taharo Shel Mizbeach. As we described it yesterday, the Kohen Gadol would separate the Gecholim and expose the Gag of the Mizbeach, and he did Sheva Hazos on the Gag of the Mizbeach. So we have now 3 rounds of Hazah. We have the round of the Hazah in the Kodesh Kodshim, and that's really 2 rounds, one of the Dam HaPar and one of the Dam HaSa'ir, each one separately, Achas Lamala, Sheva Lamata. We have a second round of Hazah on the chronos of the Mizbach HaZahav, and we said, and now we're going to see it's a machlokas, but what we went according to one opinion yesterday, and we said that after the Dam HaSa'ir was already subject to Hazah, he implemented the Hazah in the Kodesh Kodshim. Now there will be a combination of the Dam of the Sa'ir together with the Dam of the Par, and there was a Hazah on 4 chronos. We had a double machlokas yesterday. Number 1, what is the sequence? And number 2, does he actually walk around the Mizbeach or he stands in one place? But be that as it may, we've already had the second round of Hazah, which is in the Mizbeach HaPnimi, with regard to the Dam HaPar and Dam HaSa'ir. Now we have the third round, which is the third Hazah that's on Taro Shel Mizbeach, on the Gag of the Mizbeach. Okay. Now, the pasuk says, "V'lakach midam hapar umidam hasa'ir," and the Gemara in Masechta Yoma Daf Nun Vav understands that that means that he takes both damim together. That's the source and the origin of the requirement of mixing this dam with that dam in a tarobos. Fine, so we have the Dam HaPar and the Dam HaSa'ir in a tarobos. So if you want to follow me inside in the text, we're on page Zion on the top of the left. And he says the following. The Gemara in Yom on Daf Nun Zayin Amid Beis Nun Ches Amid Aleph records Machlokas Tanoim. One opinion says that Ma'arvim B'Kronos, which means, as we explained it until now, presenting this shita, the taroves of Dam HaPar and Dam HaSa'ir has to take place before that round number 2, as we called it, of the Hazah and the 4 chronos of the Mizbach Hazah. And how much more so when we're talking about Taro Shel Mizbeach, where the Torah says, V'tiro v'kidsho. So that everybody agrees, there was never a debate about the question of tiaro. The tiaro, which is stage number 3, which is in the middle of the Mizbeach, that for sure requires a taroves of Dam HaPar and Dam HaSa'ir. However, where do we have a machlokas about chronos? That's stage number 2, the second round of Hazah. One man, the Omer says, Ma'arvin B'Kronos. Already at the point of the Hazah and the Chronos, we need that combination of the 2 damim. And the other man, the Omer says, Ein Ma'arvin B'Kronos. We don't need to mix the 2 damim. We'll do a separate Hazah on the Chronos with the Dam HaPar and follow that with a separate hazah on the chronos with the dam hasoyer. But everybody agrees that tiaro, then when we get to the middle of the mizbeach, right, the emsa gaga mizbeach, that hazah requires a taroves, a mixture of dam hapar and dam hasoyer. And it all boils down, says the Gemara, to an issue about how to interpret a pasuk in Shmos Perek Lamed. The Torah says, "V'chiper Aaron al karnosov achas bashana," and it means that Aaron, the Kohen Gadol, does a kapara on the chronos once a year. What do you mean once a year? What's once a year? Obviously, once a year is a reference to Yom Kippur, because the Torah is now describing a unique avoda to Yom Kippurim, in which the Kohen Gadol is doing hazah on the chronos. According to one mandiyama, which is called Ma'arvim B'Chronos, Seder Hazos Echad V'lo Shtayim. Once we get to the Mizbeach HaPnimi, we have the identical hazah that has to be implemented twice. Once on the Chronos and once on the Tara Shel Mizbeach, Taro Shel Mizbeach. What does that mean? Seder hazah achas v'lo shtayim. It means that in both cases, when he's doing the hazah on the mizbeach, he needs a taroves of dam hapar with dam hasoy. The Gemara says the other man, the Omar, who holds ein ma'arvim b'kronos, for the hazah on the kronos, we don't have a taroves, but rather each dam is applied separately as its own hazah, dam hapar. Finish 4 kronos. Now start with dam hasoy, 4 kronos. Then he darshins achas b'shana for something else. Not achas b'shana to indicate that we have to duplicate the hazah of the taro shel mizbeach for the kronos. He uses the pasuk achas for something else, and therefore ein ma'arvin l'kronos. There's no basis and no source in the Torah, according to that man Yomar, for requiring the taroves for the azos hakronos. And therefore, the requirement of dam b'taroves is limited to the tiaro shel mizbeach, and that's going to be derived from the pasuk that we mentioned at the outset, which says v'hisa olav min hadam bi'etzbo. Dam means one single dam. How could you have one single dam when you're dealing with both the par and the soy? How could the Torah call it dam? It should have said damim in the plural. The answer is that we're going to combine both damim, and therefore it's called dam echad. And that's what it means. V'his alav min adam be'etzmo, and that's a reference to tiaro shel mizbeh. Now, there's another line here. Oh, just 1 second. I jumped the gun for a second. Kulan ma'akfos. And the Gemara establishes in Zvachim, now we're going to Masechta Zvachim, that all the hazos are absolutely critical. 1, 2, and 3. The hazos in the Kodshim, and the 2 rounds of hazos in the Heichal on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And this is derived from the word chukah. Whenever the word chukah appears, we derive from the word chukah that it is absolutely critical. However, we mentioned I think it was before Pesach, that there's one opinion that the word chukah in the context of Parshas Achrimos only refers to those unique avodos of Yom Kippurim. And those avodos, if you recall, are implemented while the Kohen Gadol is wearing Bigdei Lavan. Now, the Kohen Gadol wears Bigdei Lavan when he goes Lifnai v'Lifnim. Here, although the first avoda of Hazah, round number 1 in the Kodesh Kodshim requires Bigdei Lavan, that's not true with regard to the second and third azos, which are implemented outside the Kodesh Kodshim in the Heichal. And yet, the Gemara establishes that even if I hold that lo nemar chuka ela bavodos hanasos bebigdei lavan, nevertheless all three azos are likuva, which is fascinating. And the Gemara is actually combining all three hazos into one entity, such that each one is absolutely required and is critical. Despite the fact that the word chukah in this Mandi Omar, in this context, would only apply to hazos bifnim, meaning lifnai v'lifnim, in the Kodesh Kodashim. But nevertheless, since all three hazos integrate to form one entity of hazah, and they all three relate to the dam hasoyer and the dam hapar, those three hazos become one hazah, and the halacha of likuva, of chukah, applies now straight across the board. But the next paragraph, which is just a few words, I don't understand. He says, "B'shvicha shiorei adam nechleku b'gemara im ma'akvim im la." This would require a lot more work. It's a sugya in Yuma Daf Samach. And the question of the Gemara, whether shvichas shirayim applies the whole year round or only on Yom Kippur. And the question is whether it's critical or not. Do we define and categorize shvichas shirei adam as a mitzvah? Call it a chovas gavra, but it's not integral to the carbon and to its kapara. Or do we say no? It's just like zrikas adam, and now in this case Yom Kippur, azas adam is absolutely critical. So to shvichas shiarei adam is critical, but that's halacha that's limited to Yom Kippur. Now, Nasan mixas min amatonot shel paro shel soyer v'nishpach adam. What happens if he's got a mizrach? He has a receptacle, a klisharis that's full of the dam, and perhaps for the second two azos he needs both dam apar dam asar b'tarovas. He starts his hazah, but he didn't get a chance to complete it. And nishpach adam. Now, in the case of shchita, you remember we spoke about nishpach adam before shchita, after Kabbalah. There's no such thing as nishpach adam before shchita. I was just kidding. But I mean after shchita, but before Kabbalah, or after Kabbalah, then it was nishpach adam. Those distinctions will not apply in our context today, because we're not dealing with Kabbalah Saddam. We're dealing with Hazah. And once it's Nishpach, it's Posel Hazah. If that be the case, he has to do a replacement. What do you mean by a replacement? He's already shechted the karma. So he quotes here a sugya that Nevi'im Karbonosa. He's going to have to bring another carbon. Now he uses the singular because either he's talking about nishpach dam apar, or alternatively nishpach dam hasoy. But it could be karbanos nosofim in the plural if it was nishpach after he made the tarovis. He mixed the dam of the par with the soy, and then it was nishpach. He's left with nothing. He's got to create dam par, dam soy from scratch, and then mix them together, which means he has to bring 2 karbanos, no sofim. Echlechu tanoim. This again, that's Sugya and Yuma on Daf Samach. Mehechon maschil hazos b'korban hasheni. Fascinating. Do we assume that, let's say out of 7 hazos, he did 5? Do we assume that those 5 are registered on the Richter scale? They were absolutely kosher. And now nishpach adam, we bring a second korban. Let's pick up where we left off. He's only missing 2 hazos, and that's all he's going to do. Or do we say no? Once there was nishpach adam and he didn't complete the hazah, the korban itself is possible, and all the hazos that he did before nishpach are meaningless. He's got now a replacement korban, starting from scratch. He has to do all 7 hazos. Yesh sovrim shaliolam hu maskil mi makom sheposak bo. He begins with where he left off. So it's a pella. He's got 2 korbanos. He's got, let's call it par A, and he's had par B. With par A, he did 5 azos. With par B, he did the other 2 azos. And I'm tempted to think that according to this man, the Omar Azah is to some extent external to the karma. Meaning that we'll bring a karma for the sake of Hazah because we otherwise don't have a possibility of Hazah. But the carbon itself is kosher, even if he didn't complete the Hazos. And therefore the Hazos on the first carbon are kosher. He needs to bring a second carbon, not to replace the Hazos of the first carbon, because otherwise he cannot complete his Hazah. Like Mashal Amad over Dobin. Let's say on Rosh Chodesh I davened Shmon Esrei and I left out Yalav V'Yov. So the law is that I repeat Shmon Esrei. Let's say if it's Shachris or Mincha. What does that mean? Does that mean that I wasn't Yotzei with the first Shmon Esrei? No, I was Yotzei with the first Shmon Esrei. But I need another Shmon Esrei so that I can say Yalav V'Yov. So according to this man, the Omar, I bring the second carbon so that I can finish the Hazah. But Hazah remains independent or separate from the carbon itself. The Yesh Ovrim, Shemaschil Mitchilas HaSeder, Shel Matonos Sheposak B'hem. He's got to go back to the original Hazah. However, the Hazah divides up into 3 separate sections. Shlosha Starim Linyan Zeh, Matnas Kodesh Kodshim, Matnas Parochas, Matnas HaMizbeach. Shita Zu in Posak Be'emtza Matnas HaMizbeach, Ari Maskil Mitchilas Hazah HaMizbeach. In Posak Be'emtza Matnas HaParochas, Maskil Mitchilas Matnas HaParochas. V'chein v'matonos shebifnim. So this Mandi Omar, who says that you cannot pick up where you left off if Nishpach Adam, you got to start from scratch. That's only if he hadn't completed any of the starim. We have 3 starim. If he finished 1 say there, that registers. Again, this is further proof to, I think, my intuitive assumption. I don't know if I'm correct, that despite the fact that the Hazah was not completed, the carbon itself is kosher. I need a second carbon in order to complete and achieve the mitzvah of Hazah. If one of the three azos or two of the three azos were registered as valid, then he only brings the second carbon in order to implement the hazah shlishis or the hazah shniyah. Now, the next topic for our discussion of Yom Kippurim is a very fascinating topic, and that's the Soya Mishtaleh. There's nothing like it on the face of the earth, on the face of the map of Kodshim. It's a pellet. And the Ramban says in his commentary on the Torah that the Soya Mishtaleh is a gift to the Sar of the Seirim. I mean, which is mind-boggling. I mean, it undermines the Yisodei Torah that we're going to bring a carbon for the sake of some sort of an evil Sar, to an angel up there, like the angel of Esau, who's. And the whole avodah is outside the Mikdash. Nothing happens to the Sar Mishtalech inside the Mikdash, except for the Goral itself to choose which of the two Siyurim will be earmarked as the Sar Mishtalech. So the Sar Mishtalech is really, really wild. It's really unique. So that's the subject here of page Ches in the introduction to Masechta Yoma here of the Mesifta. And he begins with the two Seirim, right? We don't know when we get the two Seirim which one is Hashem, which one is Azazel. And especially because they're almost identical, the two Seirim. And we'll see that the halacha requires that they be very, very similar, if not identical twins. And when you look at it, we're really coming towards the end of this introduction, coming close. Okay, then. So now we'll go and open up our Masechta.